Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says Singapore must retain the ability to say no or risk losing its relevance and independence on the world stage. He says in a more turbulent world, decisions must be guided by national interests as pressure mounts and attempts are made to divide society. Sherlyn Seah has more.
The post-World War II order has ended, as Dr. Balakrishnan terms it, and Singapore now sits in a world where international relations are no longer driven by rules or consensus. He adds that major powers, long selective in applying the rule of law, are now less inclined to even engage in those inconsistencies, as seen from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and US actions in Venezuela.
This is a far more dangerous world for small countries, because small countries do not have the strategic heft to buffer ourselves from turbulence. For Singapore, a tiny city-state, the shoals are even more treacherous.
He says Singapore has to chart its own path, and how it approaches the world will be guided by national interests, which he outlined.
First, to safeguard our sovereignty, our independence, and our national unity. Second, to secure access to essential supplies and the freedom of navigation necessary for us to continue to have access to these essential supplies. The third national interest is to continue to strengthen our role as a trusted global hub for trade, for finance, for wealth management, advanced manufacturing, and other global services. And fourth aspect of our national interest is to support a rules-based multilateral approach wherever possible, recognizing that the challenges to the global commons, like climate change, like pandemics, in fact, have to be tackled collectively because they go beyond the ability of any single country, even a superpower, to resolve.
What this means is that Singapore has to say no on issues that run against these interests.
This is not about choosing sides, but about upholding principles and a careful assessment of Singapore's long-term national interests. Now, I've been in this post long enough to tell you that pressure has been and will be brought to bear on us. And there will always be attempts to weaken our will and to divide us domestically. And I would also state that sometimes we will pay a price for staking out our position.
For example, when it comes to big powers, US and China, Dr. Balakrishnan says Singapore has to work with them where interests coincide and stand up to say no where interests diverge. Singapore is also growing its network with middle powers, upgrading partnerships and deepening relations with countries that are like-minded. Meanwhile, Dr. Balakrishnan stresses that Singapore will push for deeper integration and unity within ASEAN. He outlines Singapore's work with Indonesia in areas like energy, food security and healthcare, and Malaysia with transport, economic and people ties. But with fault lines being riled up online, he adds Singaporeans must guard against division.
We do not necessarily have to agree on all our foreign policy stances, but we must agree that these are matters to be discussed and decided by Singaporeans alone. And that means keeping a wary eye on foreign interference and influence.
Dr. Balakrishnan says Singapore's strongest defense is unity, so the nation cannot be bought or bullied.
And joining me in the studio tonight is Singapore's Foreign Minister, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. Minister, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, you started your speech today in Parliament warning that the world is becoming more dangerous to small states like Singapore. So what do you see as the biggest dangers that Singapore is facing, and are we prepared?
Several. First, because of the breakdown of the rules-based world order, the risk of war and conflict has risen. Second risk, the global economic system, global supply chains, multinational corporations, is at risk of unraveling. You hear about tariffs applied, you hear great uncertainty, what tariff levels you hear of interruptions to global supply chains. That's the second. The third risk is that all this is happening while a technological revolution is occurring. The flavor of the month, of the year, obviously, is AI, but the impact on jobs, the risks to societies, all these need to be sorted out. So we've got multiple crises or potential crises on our hands at the same time.
And to meet these crises, you also said that Singapore must retain its ability to say no, especially in this turbulent world. So what is Singapore's no's? And in a way, what are the red lines that we will not cross? How do we safeguard our safety?
I've set out our national interests, right? Protecting our independence, protecting our access to essential supplies, and standing up for international law. And of course, maintaining Singapore's critical role as a trusted, reliable hub. These are non-negotiable. But we're going to have to defend this in the face of more pressure, in the face of more attempts to divide us, to erode our resolve. And I was basically sending an alarm bell to Singaporeans. Expect more turbulent weather, expect more pressure, and expect that there will be times when we will have to stake out our position, particularly when it diverges from a major power. And courteously, respectfully, and constructively say no. There's an art to doing this. But the reason for doing this carefully and deliberately is that it's a reflection of our independence. And second, it actually gives assurance to them that we're acting in our assessment of long-term national interests and not as a proxy to be used by one power or the other against another. So avoiding the collisions, but still staking out our national interests. And then the other thing is to work with for partners where we can have a common cause. And that's where the question of middle powers and ASEAN comes in. So it's going to be a delicate, a very challenging time for everyone. And it's not just foreign affairs. Home affairs, defense, the economic ministries, particularly the digital ministries. We're all going to be very, very busy.
Well, you talk about the tension between the two big powers, US and China is forefront of this. How is Singapore steadying itself, especially when, the giants in the room are fighting each other?
Well,
how do we posture?
You have to be prepared both for conflict as well as a condominium, which means the key lesson I take away from that is don't take sides. Uphold principles, be consistent, and after a while, everyone knows what Singapore stands for, and Singapore's foreign policy is predictable. That predictability, that consistency actually takes some pressure off us. Right now, I can say our relations with both America and China are in an excellent state. We know them well. We have great both strategic, economic, and defense relations. And we are able to work constructively. Our investments, our people-to-people exchanges, our economic links are all doing very well. But we cannot afford to be complacent. Yeah.
Well, big powers aside, Singapore is also expanding to meet new partners. We have new embassies in Mexico City, Addis Ababa. Also in Sabah and Sarawak, we're looking at some
new
consulates there, so exciting times. But what opportunities do you see in these regions?
You see, the point is, in a world with a geostrategic recession or rupture, actually there are still many other partners out there who still believe in international law, who still believe in free trade, who still believe in mutual interdependence and in the whole concept of multilateralism. By this, I include countries across Europe, the other rising middle powers, India, Japan, and of course, there's Africa and Latin America. So there are many people, many other entities and regions who still want to make common cause. And that's why we're also expanding our diplomatic footprint and to widen that net and to seek safety in numbers.
Well, talking about safety, there's some rather troubling reports of misinformation narratives targeting Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. How seriously does MFA take these?
We take these seriously, but we must not overreact. The point is to anticipate, to inoculate ourselves, So then when we receive a report or an interesting video, and nowadays most likely generated from an AI, we ask ourselves some questions. Where did this come from? What agenda is behind this latest video or this latest campaign? Who benefits from it? Who loses from it? And the point is just to raise the level of awareness. And look, Singaporeans are rational, pragmatic, well-informed people. And we just want to make sure that we are aware, we think about it, we don't overreact to it. And I think if we can maintain that, that posture of realism and wariness without becoming cynical or paranoid, we'll be all right.
Well, awareness aside, are there any diplomatic levers we can use to protect ourselves in this light?
The most important lever is domestic. What other countries are looking at is, look, everyone knows Singapore is multiracial, multi-religious. Everyone knows Singapore is small. Everyone knows Singapore has succeeded because we were a metropolis in an era of globalization. What they're watching for is whether Singaporeans realize the rules of the game have changed, that we are engaged in a fundamental restructuring of our economy, and the necessary social safety nets are being put in place, that we are able to maintain a cohesive and united body politic domestically. That's the most important. So I always say foreign policy begins at home, because that's really what other countries are assessing. And if they are trying to weaken us or trying to pressure us, it will seep in through domestic channels.
Yeah, as you say, unity is the first line of defense.
Absolutely.
So with the growing geopolitical tensions, there's a risk that some Singaporeans might feel drawn to conflicts overseas. How is MFA going to tackle this issue? Well,
look, all of us will respond somewhat differently to different conflicts in different parts of the world, depending on the stakeholders. We have to accept that as a given. But what we need to do is to have another layer of understanding, of appreciation, and of analysis that enables us and also reminds us that those are not fundamentally our fights or our conflicts. Yes, we have our sympathies, and yes, we do want to express our values, and in particular, compassion, humanitarianism, international law, and an informed, conscious, and careful, deliberate discussion. And sometimes even difficult discussions need to be had. But I'm still an optimist, and I believe in the good-heartedness and the clarity of mind of Singaporeans.
All right. Thank you so much, Minister, for sharing your perspectives with us today. I've been chatting with Singapore's Foreign Affairs Minister, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan.